The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory. 1885. As Sheriff Grace Armstrong fell to the ground clutching her bleeding shoulder, her star-shaped badge glinting in the harsh sunlight that beat down on the disputed boundaries of Willow Quinn's cattle ranch. She hadn't expected to take a bullet today, while attempting to settle a land dispute that had been brewing for months between Quinn and the railroad men who claimed his property stood in their way. Grace's vision blurred as the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. She had come alone, confident that her authority as the first female sheriff of Opal, Wyoming would be enough to keep the peace. At 32, she'd earned her position through grit and determination after her father, the previous sheriff, had been gunned down by outlaws 3 years prior. The town council had reluctantly appointed her as temporary replacement, never expecting her to prove herself so capable that they couldn't justify removing her when the temporary period ended. Blood seeped between her fingers as she tried to stand, her legs wobbling beneath her. The nearest town was miles away, and her horse had bolted at the sound of gunfire. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Grace caught sight of a figure approaching on horseback, the silhouette of a man against the setting sun. "Hang on there," a deep voice called out. The last thing Grace saw before consciousness slipped away was a pair of concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat. Willow Quinn had been tracking a stray calf when he heard the gunshot. At 35, he'd spent most of his life on horseback, building his modest ranch through honest work and determination. He hadn't expected to find the sheriff of Opal bleeding out on his land, especially not the woman who'd made quite an impression on the county since taking up her father's badge. "Sheriff Armstrong," he called, dismounting quickly when he saw her collapse. "Good Lord, what happened here?" Getting no response from the unconscious woman, Willow acted quickly. He tore a strip from his own shirt to create a makeshift bandage, tying it firmly around her shoulder to slow the bleeding. His ranch house was closer than town, and with night approaching and no sign of who had done the shooting, he knew he had to get her to safety. "All right, Sheriff, let's get you home," he muttered, carefully lifting her onto his horse. He climbed up behind her, supporting her limp form against his chest as he turned toward his ranch house. A modest 2-story structure he'd built with his own hands 5 years ago after finally saving enough to claim his own piece of the Wyoming frontier. The ride seemed interminable as Willow constantly checked to ensure the sheriff was still breathing. He'd had little interaction with her before, though he'd heard the talk, most of it skeptical about a woman wearing a badge. Some men couldn't stomach the idea, but Willow had always figured anybody willing to stand up for law and order deserved respect, regardless of whether they wore trousers or skirts. By the time they reached his ranch house, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. His ranch hand, an older man named Tobias, came running at the sight of Willow's horse approaching with an extra rider. "Mr. Quinn, what's happened?" Tobias called out, his weathered face creasing with concern. "It's Sheriff Armstrong. She's been shot," Willow replied, carefully dismounting while supporting Grace. "She needs help and quick. Get some hot water boiling and find my medical supplies." Tobias hurried to follow instructions while Willow carried Grace into the house. He laid her gently on his own bed, the only proper one in the house, and began the delicate process of removing her bloodied jacket to better assess the wound. Who would shoot the sheriff? Tobias wondered aloud, returning with a basin of water. "That's what I aim to find out," Willow replied grimly, his jaw set in determination. "But first, we need to make sure she survives." The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, which was both a blessing and a curse. No need to dig out a bullet, but the wound was severe, An infection was a deadly threat on the frontier. Willow had some experience with gunshot wounds and unfortunate necessity of frontier life, but he wished desperately for a proper doctor. Through the night, Willow cleaned and dressed the wound, applying a poultice his mother had taught him to make from prairie herbs that helped draw out infection. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering incoherently, her brow furrowed with pain even in her sleep. By morning, she had developed a fever. Willow sent Tobias into town to fetch the doctor and to inform Deputy Jenkins of what had happened. Left alone with the sheriff, Willow kept cool compresses on her forehead and spoke to her soothingly, hoping his voice might provide some anchor to the waking world. "You've got to pull through, Sheriff," he said quietly as he changed the bandage. "Opal needs you. And I need to know who did this to you on my land." As midday approached, Grace's eyes fluttered open, fever bright but alert. She immediately tried to sit up, gasping in pain when her shoulder protested. "Easy there," Willow said, gently pressing her back down. "You've been shot." "Quinn," she rasped, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Willow Quinn." "That's right," he nodded. "Found you on the south edge of my property yesterday. You want to tell me who put a bullet in you?" Grace's throat worked as she swallowed dryly. Willow helped her take a sip of water before she spoke again. "Railroad men," she managed. 3 of them. Said they were surveyors, but they were armed. Told me to mind my own business when I questioned why they were on private land." Willow's expression darkened. "The Central Pacific's been trying to buy my land for months, offering pennies on the dollar. When I refused, they started claiming they had right-of-way." "I know," Grace replied weakly. "That's why I was out there. Got reports they were trespassing, making threats." Before Willow could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew his attention. He moved to the window, relief washing over him at the sight of Tobias returning with Dr. Fredericks, a man in his 60s who had been treating the citizens of Opal since before it was even properly a town. Alongside them rode Deputy Jenkins, a young man who had been learning the ropes under Grace's tutelage. Dr. Fredericks wasted no time in examining Grace's wound, nodding approvingly at Willow's handiwork. "You've done well, Quinn," the doctor said. "Might have saved her life with that poultice. The wound's clean, no sign of infection yet, though the fever concerns me." While the doctor worked, Deputy Jenkins pulled Willow aside, his young face grave with concern. "Mr. Quinn, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Willow related the events as he knew them, then added what Grace had told him about the railroad men. Jenkins's face grew increasingly troubled. "This isn't the first time the railroads caused trouble," he confided. "Sheriff Armstrong's been pushing back against their strong-arm tactics for months. They don't like that she can't be bought or intimidated." After the doctor had redressed Grace's wound and left medicines for the fever and pain, he delivered his prognosis. "She needs at least 2 weeks of rest before even thinking about returning to duty," Dr. Fredericks said firmly. "The wound itself will take longer to heal fully, but moving her now could reopen it and cause bleeding." "Mr. Quinn, would it be possible for her to remain here until she's stable enough to travel?" Willow nodded without hesitation. "Of course. She can have my bed for as long as needed." The doctor and deputy departed with promises to return the following day. Deputy Jenkins would investigate the shooting, while Tobias rode back to town to gather some of Grace's personal items from her small house behind the sheriff's office. Left alone again with Grace, Willow pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for another long night of watching over her. As darkness fell, her fever spiked and she began to thrash restlessly, caught in feverish dreams. "Dad, watch out," she mumbled, her face contorted with distress. "Behind you." "No," Willow gently wiped her brow with a cool cloth. "SHH, you're safe now," he soothed. Her eyes flew open, unseeing at first, then gradually focusing on his face. "They shot him in the back," she whispered, "just like they tried with me." "Your father?" Willow asked softly. Grace nodded slightly, grimacing at the pain the movement caused. "Everyone said it was just random outlaws, but I never believed that. He was investigating the railroad's land acquisitions. Some of them didn't seem legal." Willow digested this information silently, a cold anger building in his chest. He'd heard rumors about the previous sheriff's death, but had been too focused on his own struggles with the railroad to connect the dots. "Rest now," he said. "We'll figure this out when you're stronger." Days passed slowly as Grace gradually regained her strength. The fever broke on the third day, and by the end of the week, she could sit up and take short walks around Willow's bedroom. During this time, Willow slept on a makeshift pallet in the main room of his house, giving up his comfort without complaint. They fell into a routine of sorts. Willow would bring her meals, change her bandages, and in the evenings, they would talk. At first, their conversations focused on the practicalities of her recovery and the investigation into the shooting, but gradually they began to share more personal stories. "How'd you end up a rancher?" Grace asked one evening, sitting in a chair by the window that overlooked Willow's modest but well-maintained property. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the land, highlighting the gentle roll of the hills and the cattle grazing in the distance. Willow, seated across from her, smiled slightly. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri. My pa died when I was 16, and Ma couldn't keep the place going. We lost it all. I promised myself then that one day I'd have land no one could take from me." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. "Worked as a hired hand for 12 years, saving every penny. Came to Wyoming because the land was still open, still possible for a man without connections to build something." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that need to build something that's yours." "What about you?" Willow asked. "Can't imagine it was easy becoming sheriff, especially." "Especially as a woman," Grace finished with a wry smile. "It wasn't, still isn't, but I grew up watching my father serve this community. When he died, I couldn't bear the thought of someone else wearing his badge, someone who might not care about the people here the way he did, the way I do." Willow studied her face, noticing for the first time the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her hazel eyes. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. Grace looked away, but not before Willow caught a glimpse of the emotion in her eyes. "I hope so," she said softly. As the second week of Grace's recovery began, Deputy Jenkins brought news that made her blood boil. "The railroads filed a claim against Mr. Quinn's land," Jenkins reported. "They're saying they have documents showing they purchased it from the previous owner." "That's impossible," Willow said, his voice tight with anger. "I bought this land fair and square from old man Henderson, have the deed to prove it." Grace's face hardened with determination. "Jenkins, I need you to go to the county records office. Check every document related to this property for the last 20 years. After the deputy left, Grace turned to Willow. "I need to get back to town." "Dr. Fredericks said 2 weeks minimum," Willow protested. "It's barely been 10 days. "I can rest at my own house," Grace argued. "This isn't just about me anymore. They're coming for your land, and I won't let them take it." Willow ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "And I won't have you risking your recovery. Your wound could reopen, or worse." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Grace sighed. "2 more days. Then I'm going back, with or without your help." The compromise didn't sit well with either of them, but it was the best they could manage. That night, as Willow brought Grace her evening meal, the tension between them had eased somewhat. "I'm sorry," Grace said, surprising him. "I know you're just concerned for my well-being." Willow set the tray down on the small table beside her, and I know how frustrating it is to be sidelined when there's work to be done. A small smile curved Grace's lips. Look at us, being all reasonable. Willow couldn't help but return her smile. Don't get used to it. I'm still going to argue with you if you try to leave before you're ready. The easy moment between them shifted subtly as their eyes met again, but this time there was no clash of wills, only a slow building awareness of each other. Willow cleared his throat and took a step back. "You should eat while it's hot," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. As he turned to leave, Grace called after him. "Willow." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once before continuing out the door, unsettled by the warmth that had spread through his chest at the simple use of his given name. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. Tobias burst into the house, his expression urgent. "Mr. Quinn, riders coming, 4 of them from the direction of town." Willow grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. "Get Sheriff Armstrong away from the windows, then take position at the back door." Grace, however, had other ideas. Despite her injury, she appeared beside Willow, her service revolver in hand. "I'm not hiding," she said firmly. "This is my fight too." Before Willow could argue, the riders pulled up in front of the house. His grip on his rifle tightened when he recognized one of them as Victor Holloway, the railroad's regional land agent, a man known for his ruthless tactics in acquiring property for the company. "Quinn," Holloway called out. "We need to talk business." Willow stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle visible but not directly aimed. Grace stood slightly behind him, her injured arm tucked close to her body, her revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Nothing to discuss, Holloway," Willow called back. "This land isn't for sale, and your men had no right to be trespassing here." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, that's not entirely accurate. According to our records, this property was sold to the Central Pacific 3 months ago." "That's a lie," Willow said flatly. "I have the deed, signed and registered." "Paperwork can be so confusing," Holloway said with mock sympathy. "But our lawyers are quite certain. In fact, we've come to give you notice. You have 1 week to vacate the premises." Grace stepped forward then, the movement drawing Holloway's attention to her for the first time. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed dangerously. "Sheriff Armstrong, what a surprise to find you here. I heard you'd been injured in an unfortunate accident." "It was no accident," Grace said coldly. "Your men shot me when I caught them trespassing and making threats." Holloway's expression remained smooth, but his eyes hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Sheriff. Do you have any proof of these alleged trespassers' connection to the railroad?" "They were carrying Central Pacific surveying equipment," Grace replied. "And one of them was kind enough to mention your name before he pulled the trigger." This seemed to unsettle Holloway briefly, but he recovered quickly. "Sounds like the ravings of a feverish mind to me." "I'm sure the judge will see it the same way when we present our case for immediate possession of this property." "You won't get away with this," Willow said, his voice low and dangerous. "I won't be forced off my land by fraudulent claims." Holloway's smile turned cruel. "You know, Quinn, accidents happen out here in the wilderness, tragic ones. Just ask the sheriff." He tipped his hat mockingly. 1 week, Quinn, then we'll be back with the marshal and an eviction notice." As the riders departed, Grace and Willow exchanged grim looks. "We need to get to those records," Grace said. "If they've falsified documents, we need proof before they can get a judge to sign off on their claim." "Agreed," Willow said. "But Holloway's not the type to leave loose ends. If there are false documents, he'll have covered his tracks." Grace's expression turned thoughtful. "Unless, Willow, did you ever meet the previous owner's family, Henderson's kin, Willow shook his head. Henderson told me he had a daughter back east, but she never came out here. Why? Because if they've forged a sale, they'd need to forge his signature. If we can find genuine examples of Henderson's handwriting and compare them to whatever document they're using. Willow nodded slowly, understanding dawning. We could prove the forgery. Exactly, Grace said. But first, we need to see what they've filed. I need to get back to town. This time, Willow didn't argue. We'll leave in the morning. Together. The ride into Opal the next day was tense. Grace insisted on wearing her badge and gun belt, though Willow could see the pain it caused her to move her injured arm. They arrived to find the small town buzzing with unusual activity. Several well-dressed men whom Willow didn't recognize were coming and going from the county clerk's office. Deputy Jenkins met them outside the sheriff's office, relief evident on his young face at the sight of Grace. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're back. Things have been getting strange around here." Inside, Jenkins updated them on his findings. "I checked the records like you asked. There's a bill of sale dated 3 months ago showing Henderson sold the property to Central Pacific before his death." "That's impossible," Willow said. "Henderson died over 2 years ago. I bought the property from his estate through his lawyer." Grace frowned. "Do you remember the lawyer's name?" "Simmons. Edward Simmons from Cheyenne." "Jenkins," Grace said, "send a telegram to Cheyenne. We need to contact Simmons immediately." As Jenkins left to send the telegram, Grace lowered herself carefully into the chair behind her desk, wincing slightly. "We also need to find examples of Henderson's actual signature." Willow paced the small office, his worry for both Grace's health and his ranch making it impossible to stay still. What if they've already corrupted the local judge? Holloway seemed pretty confident. Grace considered this. Judge Parker is a fair man, but he's bound by the law. If the documents look legitimate, he'll have to rule accordingly. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Mayor Wallace, a portly man whose affable demeanor hid a sharp political mind. "Sheriff Armstrong, we heard you were injured. I must say, it's a relief to see you back at your post," the mayor said, though his expression suggested more concern than relief. "And Mr. Quinn, I understand congratulations are in order. The sale of your ranch to the railroad will bring much-needed progress to our little town." "There was no sale," Willow said firmly. "The railroad is attempting to steal my land through forged documents." The mayor's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Quinn. The railroad representatives have shown me the bill of sale themselves. Seems quite legitimate." "Mayor Wallace," Grace interjected, "we have reason to believe the document is a forgery. The previous owner, Mr. Henderson, died over 2 years ago, yet this supposed bill of sale is dated just 3 months ago." The mayor's face paled slightly. I wasn't aware of that discrepancy." "We're investigating the matter fully," Grace continued. "I would appreciate your discretion until we've completed our inquiry." After the mayor departed, promising somewhat reluctantly to keep the information to himself, Grace and Willow continued their planning. "We should check the bank records," Willow suggested. "If there was a sale, there should be a record of payment." Grace nodded. "Good thinking. Banks keep meticulous records." As they prepared to leave for the bank, Grace suddenly swayed on her feet, her face going pale. Willow was at her side instantly, supporting her with a hand at her elbow. "You need to rest," he said, concern evident in his voice. Grace shook her head stubbornly. "There's no time. Holloway's moving fast and we need to be faster." "You're no good to anyone if you collapse," Willow argued. "At least take a few hours to rest. I can start at the bank." Their compromise was that Grace would rest at her small house while Willow visited the bank with Deputy Jenkins. The bank manager, Mr. Reynolds, was initially reluctant to share information, but became more cooperative when Jenkins explained they were investigating potential fraud. No large transactions in Henderson's name for the 3 years before his death, Reynolds confirmed after checking the records. And certainly nothing in the past 3 months. What about any large deposits to local accounts around that time? Willow asked. Someone forging documents might have been paid for their services. Reynolds frowned thoughtfully and checked another ledger. There was one unusual deposit. County Clerk Addison received $500 from an unnamed source about 4 months ago, claimed it was an inheritance from an uncle. Willow and Jenkins exchanged significant looks. Addison had been the county clerk for over a decade, responsible for recording property transfers and maintaining land records. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Jenkins said. "This information stays between us for now." By the time they returned to Grace's house, it was late afternoon. They found her at her small kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "I've been reviewing every land transaction involving the railroad for the past year," she explained, looking up at their entrance. "They've acquired 12 properties in the county. Most seem legitimate, but 3 have similar patterns: elderly or absent owners, sales processed quickly with minimal documentation." Willow shared what they'd learned at the bank. Grace's expression hardened as the pieces began to fall into place. "Addison," she said grimly. "We need to pay him a visit." They found the clerk closing up his office for the day. At the sight of Grace, Addison's usually impassive face registered shock, followed quickly by fear. "Sheriff Armstrong, I heard you were injured." "I was shot," Grace said bluntly, stepping into the office with Willow and Jenkins behind her. "By men who were trespassing on Mr. Quinn's property. Men working for the railroad." Addison's eyes darted nervously between the 3 of them. "I don't know anything about that." "But you do know about the falsified bill of sale showing Henderson sold his property to the railroad 3 months ago," Grace said, watching him carefully. "Despite the fact that Henderson has been dead for over 2 years. Addison's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about." $500 is a lot of money, Addison," Willow said quietly. "Was it worth selling your integrity? Worth nearly getting the sheriff killed?" The clerk's composure cracked. "I didn't know they would hurt anyone." Holloway said it was just a paperwork issue, that Quinn was being unreasonable about selling. "You forged official documents," Grace said. "That's a felony." Addison slumped into his chair, the fight going out of him. "Holloway threatened me, said he'd reveal some indiscretions from my past if I didn't help him. Once I did, he owned me, kept demanding more, changing dates, altering records." "We need your signed confession," Grace said, "and you'll testify against Holloway and the railroad." After securing Addison's written confession, they confronted Judge Parker with the evidence. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, listened gravely to their account. "This is deeply disturbing," he said when they finished. "Falsifying land records undermines the very foundation of property rights. I'll issue warrants for Holloway and his associates immediately." But when Deputy Jenkins went to serve the warrants at the hotel where Holloway and his men were staying, he returned with troubling news. "They're gone," Jenkins reported. "Left in a hurry, according to the hotel clerk. Took the afternoon train west." Grace frowned. "Someone warned them. Mayor Wallace, most likely. He's been pushing for the railroad to build a major station in Opal." "What now?" Willow asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Now," Grace said determinedly, "we wire the federal marshal's office. Fraud across state lines is a federal offense. And we put the word out to every sheriff and deputy in a 100-mile radius. Holloway won't get far." That night, exhausted from the day's events, Grace finally admitted she needed rest. Willow insisted on escorting her home, concerned about her still healing wound. "You can stay in town tonight," Grace offered as they reached her small house. "The hotel has rooms." Willow shook his head. "I need to get back to the ranch. Tobias is keeping watch, but after today's revelations, I don't trust Holloway not to try something desperate." Grace's expression grew concerned. "You shouldn't be alone out there. Holloway might have left men behind." "I can handle myself," Willow assured her. "I know you can," Grace said softly, "but you don't have to." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Willow found himself noticing the way the fading light caught in her auburn hair, the determination in her eyes that had somehow become familiar and comforting in the weeks since he'd found her wounded on his land. "I'll be fine," he said finally, breaking the spell. "Get some rest, Sheriff. Tomorrow we continue the fight." Willow rode back to his ranch under a canopy of stars, his mind turning over the events of the past weeks. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when his feelings for Grace had shifted from respect to something deeper, more complicated. Perhaps it was during those long nights watching over her fever, or maybe during their evening conversations as she recovered. Regardless, he now found himself thinking of her not just as the sheriff, but as Grace, brave, principled, and unexpectedly vulnerable. The ranch was quiet when he arrived, Tobias keeping watch from the porch. "Any trouble?" Willow asked as he dismounted. "All quiet, boss," Tobias reported. "How'd it go in town?" Willow briefly explained the day's discoveries. "Keep your eyes open tonight. Holloway's on the run, but he might have friends still around." Inside, Willow found himself standing in the doorway of his bedroom, now empty with Grace gone. The room seemed to hold echoes of her presence, a faint scent of lavender from the soap Tobias had brought from her house. The chair by the window, where they'd talked late into evenings. He realized with surprise how quickly he'd grown accustomed to her presence in his home, how empty it felt now without her. The next morning brought a telegram from the federal marshal's office. They were dispatching agents to investigate the railroad's land acquisition practices and had alerted authorities along the rail lines to be on the lookout for Holloway. Willow rode into town to share the news with Grace, finding her at her desk, despite Dr. Fredericks's continued admonishments to rest. "You're as stubborn as a mule," Willow said by way of greeting, though there was no heat in his words. Grace looked up with a smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, less burdened. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Quinn." Willow felt an answering smile tug at his lips as he handed her the telegram. "Good news. The feds are taking this seriously." "Even better news," Grace replied, passing him a telegram of her own. "Holloway was arrested in Laramie this morning. Apparently he was trying to charter a private train to take him to California." Relief washed over Willow. "So it's over." "Not quite," Grace said. "We still need to ensure all the fraudulent land transfers are nullified, and there will be a trial. But yes, the immediate threat to your ranch is over." As the weeks passed, life in Opal gradually returned to normal. The federal investigation uncovered widespread corruption within the regional offices of the Central Pacific Railroad, leading to multiple arrests and the resignation of several company executives. Judge Parker officially voided all the fraudulent land transfers, ensuring Willow's ranch and the other affected properties remained with their rightful owners. Grace continued to heal, gradually resuming her full duties as sheriff. Her standing in the community, already strong, grew even more secure as the details of the railroad conspiracy became public knowledge. Even those who had initially doubted a woman's ability to serve as sheriff were won over by her determination and courage. For Willow, the resolution of the land dispute brought relief, but also a strange sense of loss. With the crisis past, he had fewer reasons to ride into town, fewer excuses to seek out Grace's company. He found himself inventing reasons to visit the sheriff's office, reports of suspicious travelers near his property, questions about the upcoming trial, concerns about cattle rustlers that even he knew were far-fetched. Grace, for her part, seemed to welcome his visits, her eyes lighting up when he walked through her door. They fell into a comfortable pattern of conversation, discussing the ongoing investigation, town gossip, and occasionally, more personal matters. It was during one such visit, nearly 2 months after the shooting, that Willow finally acknowledged to himself what he had been avoiding. He had fallen in love with Grace Armstrong. The realization came to him suddenly as he watched her organizing wanted posters, her brow furrowed in concentration, a strand of auburn hair escaping from its pins to curl against her cheek. The desire to reach out and tuck that strand behind her ear was so strong it nearly took his breath away. "Willow," Grace's voice broke into his thoughts, "is everything all right? You look a million miles away." He cleared his throat, embarrassed to be caught staring. "Just thinking about the harvest. It's coming up soon." Grace nodded, though she looked unconvinced. "Will you need to hire extra hands?" "Probably," Willow replied, grateful for the safe topic. Though good workers are hard to find these days. Their conversation drifted to practical matters, the moment passing unremarked. Yet as Willow rode home that evening, he couldn't shake the knowledge that something fundamental had changed for him. The question now was what, if anything, he should do about it. The answer came unexpectedly the following week, when a town celebration was organized to honor those who had helped expose the railroad conspiracy. Mayor Wallace, eager to rebuild his reputation after his initial support of the railroad's claims, had declared a holiday with a special dinner at the town hall. Willow arrived to find the normally austere building transformed with bunting and flowers. Nearly everyone in Opal had turned out for the occasion, creating a festive atmosphere that was rare in the hardworking frontier town. He spotted Grace immediately, standing near the front of the room in conversation with Judge Parker. She wore a deep green dress instead of her usual practical attire, her auburn hair arranged in an elegant style that softened her features. The sight of her out of uniform, looking every inch a lady while still wearing her sheriff's badge pinned prominently on her bodice, struck Willow with unexpected force. As if sensing his gaze, Grace looked up, her eyes finding his across the crowded room. A smile spread across her face, and she excused herself from the judge to make her way toward him. "Mr. Quinn," she greeted him formally, though her eyes held a warmth that belied the formal address. "I'm glad you could come." "Wouldn't have missed it," Willow replied, suddenly aware of how many people were watching their interaction with interest. Gossip traveled fast in small towns, and he had no doubt that his frequent visits to the sheriff's office had been noted and discussed. The evening progressed with speeches from the mayor and judge, commendations for Grace, Deputy Jenkins, and even Willow himself for their roles in uncovering the conspiracy. Throughout it all, Willow found his attention repeatedly drawn to Grace, watching how she carried herself with quiet dignity, accepting the praise with modest grace while deflecting attention to others who had helped. As the formal part of the evening gave way to music and dancing, Willow gathered his courage and approached Grace, who stood watching the forming couples with a wistful expression. "Would you care to dance, Sheriff?" he asked, offering his hand. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by pleasure. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Quinn." As they moved onto the dance floor, Willow was acutely aware of the attention they drew. The town's bachelor rancher dancing with their female sheriff was bound to set tongues wagging. Yet as soon as Grace's hand settled in his, all concerns about gossip faded away. "You dance well," Grace commented as they moved through the steps of a waltz. "Not what I would have expected from a rancher." Willow smiled. "My mother insisted I learn. Said no son of hers would embarrass her at social gatherings, even if we were just poor farmers." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Willow agreed softly. "She would have liked you." Grace's eyes met his, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. "Would she?" "A strong woman who knows her own mind and stands by her principles." "Oh yes, she would have approved wholeheartedly." The dance ended too soon, and they reluctantly separated as social convention demanded they dance with others. Yet throughout the evening, Willow found himself continually aware of Grace's location in the room, their eyes meeting occasionally across the crowd, a private connection in the midst of the public celebration. As the evening drew to a close, Willow offered to walk Grace home. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the Wyoming sky as they strolled through the quiet streets of Opal. "It was a nice celebration," Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "It was," Willow agreed. "Though I suspect Mayor Wallace was more interested in rehabilitating his own reputation than honoring our efforts." Grace laughed softly. "You're probably right. Politics is always part of these things." They reached her small house at the edge of town, stopping at the gate to her tiny yard. The moment felt weighted with possibility, both of them reluctant to end the evening. "Grace," Willow began, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain. How did a man tell a woman like Grace Armstrong that he had fallen in love with her? That watching her nearly die in his home had made him realize how empty his life would be without her in it. "Yes," she prompted when he didn't continue, her eyes searching his face in the moonlight. Willow took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about that day I found you on my land. About how different things might have been if I hadn't come along when I did." Grace's expression softened. "I've thought about that too. I owe you my life, Willow." "No," he said quickly. "That's not. I'm not looking for gratitude. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that finding you that day changed something for me. Caring for you while you recovered, talking with you in the evenings. It made me realize what I've been missing in my life." He paused, gathering his courage. "I've built my ranch, made it successful. I thought that was enough, but it's not anymore." Grace stood very still, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "What are you saying, Willow?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Grace, more than I expected to, more than might be wise given your position and mine. But I can't pretend otherwise any longer." The silence that followed his declaration seemed endless. Then, slowly, Grace stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I never expected this," she said softly. "When I took up my father's badge, I assumed it meant setting aside certain hopes. A woman in my position, most men can't accept it." Hope flared in Willow's chest. "I'm not most men." A smile curved Grace's lips. "No, you're not. You've never once suggested I should be anything other than what I am. Do you know how rare that is it?" Willow asked, genuinely surprised. "Seems foolish to want to change the very thing that makes you remarkable." Grace's smile widened. "And that, Willow Quinn, is why I find myself thinking about you far more often than is proper for a sheriff considering one of her citizens." Joy surged through Willow at her words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her hand. When she didn't resist, he drew it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "May I call on you properly, Sheriff Armstrong? Sunday dinner, perhaps?" "I'd like that very much," Grace replied, her voice warm with promise. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Willow. Sunday dinner became a regular tradition, sometimes at Grace's small house, sometimes at his ranch. They discovered shared interests in books and music, debated politics, and exchanged stories of their childhoods. Each revelation, each shared confidence, strengthened the bond growing between them. The town of Opal watched their courtship with a mixture of surprise, approval, and in some quarters, disapproval. Some felt it inappropriate for the sheriff to be courting openly, while others were simply pleased to see two well-respected members of their community finding happiness together. Grace continued her duties as sheriff with the same dedication as always, though Willow noticed she now delegated more to Deputy Jenkins, allowing herself occasional afternoons off to ride out to his ranch or accompany him on picnics in the rolling hills surrounding Opal. Summer gave way to fall, the landscape transforming in a blaze of color before the first snows of winter began to dust the Wyoming plains. By then, Willow knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Grace Armstrong. The question of how to propose, however, plagued him. Grace was not a conventional woman, and a conventional proposal seemed inadequate. He wanted something meaningful, something that honored both her independence and their shared history. Inspiration struck on a crisp December morning, as he was going through a chest of his mother's belongings, looking for a quilt to add to his bed as the nights grew colder. At the bottom of the chest, he found a small wooden box containing his mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a single small diamond. Beside it lay his father's ring, plain gold worn smooth by years of hard work. That evening he rode into town, the rings carefully wrapped and tucked into his pocket. He found Grace in her office, reviewing wanted posters by lamplight. "You work too late," he said by way of greeting, closing the door behind him. Grace looked up with a smile that warmed him more effectively than any fire could have. "Some of us don't have the luxury of stopping work when the sun sets." "True enough," Willow acknowledged, crossing to her desk, "but I thought you might make an exception tonight." "I have something important to discuss with you." Curiosity sparked in Grace's eyes as she set aside her work. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," Willow said, suddenly nervous despite his careful planning. "At least, I hope not." Taking a deep breath, he withdrew the small package from his pocket and placed it on her desk. "These belong to my parents." Grace's expression softened as she carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing the two rings nestled inside. "They're beautiful, Willow." "My father gave that ring to my mother when they had nothing but each other and a dream of building something lasting," Willow said quietly. "It wasn't much, but it was a promise he kept until the day he died." Understanding dawned in Grace's eyes as Willow dropped to one knee beside her desk. "Grace Armstrong, I love you. Your strength, your determination, your unwavering sense of justice. I love the way you care for this town, the way you never back down when something matters. And I hope, more than anything, that you might consider sharing your life with mine." Grace's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked from the rings to Willow's face. "You understand what you're asking. I'm the sheriff, Willow. I can't give that up, not even for you." "I would never ask you to," Willow said firmly. "Your badge is part of who you are, Grace. I'm not proposing to the woman I want you to become. I'm proposing to the woman you are right now." A single tear escaped, trailing down Grace's cheek. "In that case, Willow Quinn, my answer is yes." Joy, unlike anything Willow had ever known, surged through him as he rose to his feet, drawing Grace up with him. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Willow rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you, I'm a traditional man in some ways. I'll worry every time you put on that badge and ride out to face danger." Grace smiled, her eyes still shining with emotion. And I should warn you that I'll continue to be stubborn, independent, and occasionally reckless in pursuit of justice." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Willow replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. News of their engagement spread through Opal with the speed that only small-town gossip can achieve. The reaction was predominantly positive, with most citizens having watched their courtship with approval. Even those who had initially objected to a female sheriff had come to respect Grace's dedication and effectiveness in the role. They were married on a bright spring day in 1886, with nearly the entire town turning out for the celebration. Grace wore a simple white dress with her sheriff's badge pinned proudly over her heart. Willow, usually most comfortable in work clothes, cut a striking figure in a new suit, his expression radiating happiness as Grace walked down the aisle of Opal's small church toward him. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, his usually stern countenance softened by a genuine smile as he pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than the small town usually saw in a month. Their life together began with practical considerations. Grace moved to Willow's ranch, though she maintained her office in town, riding in daily to fulfill her duties as sheriff. They converted one of the ranch's outbuildings into a small sheriff's substation, complete with a holding cell for those rare occasions when a prisoner needed to be kept overnight before transport to the county jail. The arrangement raised eyebrows in some quarters, but Grace's effectiveness as sheriff quickly silenced most critics. Having a law enforcement presence outside of town proved beneficial, reducing response times to outlying farms and ranches. Deputy Jenkins, now promoted to full deputy status, handled most of the day-to-day operations in town, freeing Grace to patrol the more distant parts of her jurisdiction. For Willow, marriage brought a fullness to life he had never imagined possible. The ranch house, once merely a place to eat and sleep between days of work, became a true home. Grace's presence filled the rooms with warmth, her practical nature complementing his own in ways that made their partnership feel destined. Their first major test as a married couple came in the fall of 1886, when a gang of cattle rustlers began operating in the area. Several local ranchers reported missing stock, with signs pointing to a well-organized operation rather than opportunistic thieves. Grace threw herself into the investigation with her usual determination, spending long days tracking the rustlers' movements and gathering evidence. Willow supported her efforts while managing both his ranch and hers during her frequent absences, worried but proud of her dedication. The breakthrough came when Grace and Deputy Jenkins managed to track the rustlers to their hideout in an abandoned mining camp in the hills. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, Grace decided to confront the gang directly, a decision that nearly ended in tragedy when she was ambushed and captured by the rustlers. Word reached Willow through a frantic message from Jenkins, who had escaped to get help. The hours that followed were the longest of Willow's life as he organized a rescue party from among the local ranchers and rode hard for the mining camp, fear for Grace's safety a constant knot in his stomach. They arrived to find a standoff in progress. Grace, though bound, had managed to convince one of the younger gang members to turn against his companions, creating division within the group. The resulting chaos gave Willow and the rescue party the opportunity they needed to surround the camp and force the rustlers' surrender. When it was over, with the rustlers securely bound and ready for transport to the county jail, Willow finally allowed himself to acknowledge how close he had come to losing Grace. Cutting the ropes from her wrists, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, uncaring of the audience of ranchers and captured criminals. "Don't ever do that to me again," he whispered against her hair, Grace returned his embrace with equal fervor. "I can't promise that," she said softly. "It's my job." "I know," Willow acknowledged, pulling back to look at her. "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are, just maybe wait for backup next time." A faint smile curved Grace's lips. "I'll consider it." Later, after the rustlers had been safely delivered to the county jail and statements taken, they returned to their ranch in the quiet hours before dawn. The events of the day had left them both physically exhausted but too emotionally wounded to sleep. They sat on the porch, watching as the first hints of sunrise began to lighten the eastern sky, a blanket shared between them against the autumn chill. "I was so afraid," Willow admitted into the peaceful silence. "When Jenkins rode up with news you'd been captured. I've never felt fear like that." Grace leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I was afraid too, not of dying exactly, but of leaving you, of all the years we wouldn't have together." Willow tightened his arm around her. "Is it selfish to wish sometimes that you'd chosen an easier profession? Something less dangerous, probably," Grace acknowledged with a small smile. "But I understand. I worry about you too, you know. Ranching has its own dangers." "Hardly comparable to facing down armed criminals," Willow pointed out. "Tell that to Sam Davis's widow. He died when his horse threw him last spring, just going about his regular work." Grace turned to look at him directly. "Life has no guarantees, Willow. All we can do is live it as fully and honestly as we can, while we have the chance." The wisdom in her words struck Willow deeply. "When did you get so philosophical?" "Comes with the badge," Grace replied, her tone lightening. "That and watching too many sunrises after long nights." They fell silent again, watching as the sky transformed from deep indigo to the pink and gold of dawn. As the first direct rays of sunlight touched their faces, Grace spoke again, her voice soft but certain. "I'm pregnant, Willow." The world seemed to stop for a moment as her words registered. We're going to have a baby," Grace nodded, a mixture of joy and apprehension in her eyes. "Doctor Fredericks confirmed it yesterday. That's where I was before I got word of the rustlers' location." 1,000 emotions swept through Willow: joy, fear, overwhelming love, and a fierce protectiveness that took his breath away. "A baby," he repeated, the word filled with wonder. "Our baby." Grace bit her lip, uncertainty creeping into her expression. "I know this changes things. My job, the dangers. We'll figure it out," Willow assured her, pulling her close again. "Together, like we always do." The months that followed brought adjustments as they prepared for the arrival of their child. Grace gradually reduced her duties as sheriff, delegating more to Deputy Jenkins as her pregnancy progressed. She remained involved in the more administrative aspects of the job, however, refusing to step away completely despite pressure from some quarters of the town who felt a pregnant woman had no business wearing a badge. Willow supported her choices while quietly ensuring she didn't overexert herself. A balancing act that occasionally led to heated discussions, but ultimately strengthened their partnership as they learned to navigate this new phase of their life together. Their son, James William Quinn, was born on a snowy night in February 1887. The delivery was difficult, leaving Grace exhausted but triumphant as she held their child for the first time. Willow, who had paced outside the bedroom throughout the ordeal, felt his heart might burst with love at the sight of his wife and newborn son together. "He has your eyes," Grace murmured, tracing a gentle finger along the baby's cheek. "And your determination," Willow replied, noting the strong grip of tiny fingers around his own. "Poor child, with the two of us as parents, he's bound to be stubborn as a mule." Grace laughed weakly, her exhaustion evident. "A fine quality in the right circumstances." Parenthood brought new challenges and unexpected joys. Grace, who had worried about balancing motherhood with her duties as sheriff, discovered that her organizational skills served her well in managing both roles. After a brief period at home with the baby, she returned to her position, though with modified hours that allowed her to be present for James's key moments. Willow expanded the ranch house, adding rooms for their growing family and hiring a local widow, Mrs. Holden, to help with the baby when both he and Grace were occupied with their respective duties. The arrangement worked well, providing James with loving care while allowing his parents to continue the work that fulfilled them. As James grew from infant to toddler, the Quinn Ranch became a unique blend of working cattle operation and informal law enforcement outpost. It wasn't uncommon for local farmers to stop by to report minor infractions or seek advice from the sheriff while she balanced her son on her hip. Willow often joked that their home was the only place in Wyoming territory where you could report a stolen horse and get fresh baked bread at the same time, thanks to Mrs. Holden's domestic skills. The years passed with the rhythm of frontier life, seasons of hard work, punctuated by moments of celebration, community gatherings, and quiet family evenings. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's fearless spirit, equally at home on horseback or helping Mrs. Holden in the kitchen when James was 4. The family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Elena Rose. Ellie, as she was quickly nicknamed, had her mother's auburn hair and a disposition that seemed sunny from her first days. James took to big brotherhood with serious dedication, proudly helping with his sister in ways that sometimes created more work, but always brought smiles to his parents' faces. Through it all, Grace continued as sheriff, her reputation growing throughout the territory as a fair but firm enforcer of the law. Willow's ranch prospered, expanding to include additional grazing land and a small orchard that Grace had insisted on planting for the children to enjoy. Their partnership, both personal and practical, became something of a legend in Opal and the surrounding communities. The sheriff and the rancher, who had built a life that honored both their callings while creating something neither could have achieved alone. In the spring of 1895, as Wyoming prepared to celebrate its 5th anniversary of statehood, Grace received an unexpected letter from the governor's office. She had been recommended for appointment as the first female U.S. Marshal for the Wyoming District, a position that would expand her jurisdiction but require frequent travel throughout the state. The offer presented both opportunity and challenge. Grace, now in her early 40s, had served as sheriff of Opal for 15 years, bringing stability and respect to the position her father had once held. The marshal's badge would be a recognition of her achievements, a chance to make a difference on a larger scale. But it would also mean time away from home, from Willow and their children, now 8 and 4. For days, Grace wrestled with the decision, discussing it endlessly with Willow as they sat on their porch in the evenings after the children were asleep. "You've earned this," Willow told her one night, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "No one in the territory has a better record or more respect," Grace sighed, leaning into his familiar warmth. "But the children are still young, and the travel involved. We would manage," Willow assured her. "Mrs. Holden adores the children, and I'm perfectly capable of handling things here when you're away." "I know you are," Grace said, turning to look at him directly. "That's not the question. The question is whether I want to miss those moments, James losing his first tooth, Ellie learning to read. The days we can't get back." Willow understood her conflict all too well. They had built their life on mutual respect for each other's work, on the belief that they were stronger together than apart. But they had also built it on family, on the home they had created not just in physical structure but in shared experiences. "What does your heart tell you?" he asked softly. Grace was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out at the land they had defended and nurtured together. Finally, she smiled, a decision reached. "My heart tells me that I've already achieved more than I ever dreamed possible," she said. "Sheriff Armstrong has had her time. Perhaps now it's time for Grace Quinn to explore other possibilities." "Are you sure?" Willow asked, surprised. "I don't want you to regret turning this down." Grace shook her head. "I won't regret it. I've worn the badge for 15 years, Willow. I've seen this town grow from a dusty outpost to a proper community. I've trained deputies who now serve throughout the territory. I've made my mark." She took his hand, her fingers threading through his with the familiarity of years together. "But there are other ways to serve, other contributions to make. The governor is also establishing a territorial commission on land rights and water access issues we both care deeply about. Issues that affect our children's future more directly than chasing outlaws ever will." Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes. "You're thinking of the commission instead of the marshal's position." Grace nodded. "It would still involve some travel but less than the marshal's role, and it would allow me to use what I've learned in a different way. Plus," she added with a smile, "I suspect a certain rancher I know might have some valuable insights to contribute." Willow laughed, pulling her close. "Grace Armstrong Quinn, you continue to surprise me even after all these years." "Good," she replied, settling comfortably against him. "I'd hate to become predictable in my old age." Grace's decision to accept a position on the Territorial Commission, while declining the marshal's badge, marked a new chapter for their family. She officially retired as sheriff of Opal in the summer of 1895, handing her badge to Deputy Jenkins, who had long since proven himself worthy of the responsibility. The commission work suited her well, allowing her to advocate for fair land and water policies that protected both small ranchers and the growing communities of Wyoming. Willow occasionally accompanied her to meetings, his practical knowledge of ranching and water management proving valuable to the discussions. Their children flourished in an environment that valued both education and practical skills. James showed an early aptitude for numbers and planning, helping his father calculate grazing rotations and breeding schedules by the time he was 10. Ellie, with her mother's independent spirit, became an accomplished rider and developed a keen interest in the natural world, collecting specimens of plants and insects that she meticulously cataloged with Mrs. Holden's help. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Quinn Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built through partnership, determination, and love. The original modest house had expanded over the years, with additions to accommodate their growing family and the occasional visitors who sought Grace's advice on legal matters or Willow's insights on ranching. In the summer of 1905, 20 years after the fateful day when Willow had found Grace bleeding on his land, they hosted a celebration that brought together friends, family, and neighbors from throughout the county. The occasion was officially their 20th wedding anniversary, but it served as a celebration of all they had built together. Under a canopy of twinkling lights strung across the ranch yard, with music provided by a local string band, they danced just as they had at that town celebration so many years ago. Older now, with silver threading through Grace's auburn hair and lines of experience etched around Willow's eyes, they moved together with the easy synchronicity that comes from 2 decades of shared life. "Did you ever imagine this?" Grace asked as they swayed to the music, her head resting comfortably against Willow's shoulder. "That day when you found me, Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Willow smiled, remembering the fierce, wounded woman he had carried to safety all those years ago. "I think part of me knew even then that you were going to change my life. I just didn't realize how completely." Around them, their life's work continued to unfold. James, now 18 and preparing to attend university in Cheyenne, danced with Mrs. Holden, making the older woman laugh with his exaggerated formality. Ellie, at 14 already showing signs of the beauty she would become, sat with a group of friends, their heads bent together in animated conversation. "We did well," Grace said softly, following Willow's gaze to their children. "With all of it, we did," Willow agreed, tightening his arms around her. "Though I still maintain the best decision I ever made was riding out to check on that stray calf the day you got shot." Grace laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been when he first heard it. "And the best decision I ever made was not dying on your property." "Always practical, my sheriff," Willow teased, spinning her gently as the music swelled. "Always," Grace agreed. Then, with the directness that had first drawn him to her, she added, "I love you, Willow Quinn." "Through every season, every challenge, every joy, I have never regretted choosing this life with you." Willow stopped dancing, looking down at her with an expression that held 20 years of shared history and a promise of years yet to come. "Nor I with you, Grace, not for a single moment." And there, under the stars that had witnessed their beginning, with the land they had defended stretching out around them and the family they had created nearby, they sealed that truth with a kiss as honest and true as the badge she had worn and the love they had built together, one day at a time.